My name is Alvin, or Alvin in Dutch, and I'm going to talk about RSD and about responses to rejection in general. First of all, I'm 31 years old right now. I'm from the Netherlands. I am autistic. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome back when I was 10 years old. I've worked as a so-called expert by experience in mental health care for around 10 years, providing peer support. And a couple of years ago, I started my PhD journey, and I'm studying stress and social pain, more about that later, in autistic individuals. And basically, I'm studying two topics. First of all, I'm studying RSD, or the scientific term social pain. And I'm also studying the Stress Autism Mate application, which is a free to download app, which helps people with autism to understand their stress better, and also provides exercises and tips and information and peer support to reduce stressors. So might really be interesting even to reduce your RSD a little bit or to help with it better. So if you're interested in it, it's free to download in the Google Play Store and the App Store, and check it out. Right. Before I'm going to start about RSD, I do wish to talk a little bit about rejection in general and why it even does something to us. And to do so, I often start, taking you on a little bit of a time travel, going back into the ancient days. Because, well, right now we may not be scared to be bitten by tigers all the time anymore. But back then there were threats to our lives pretty much everywhere. And as humans, we aren't the strongest being, we aren't the quickest beings. We had to come up with some tactic in able to survive all these years. And that tactic was, well, living in a group and doing things together and collaborating. So in the end, the people who are best at remaining and retaining human bonds, staying in a group, collaborating in a group, were the people to reproduce, were the people to survive. And therefore, slowly, the brain has evolved for us to become social beings and for belonging to be really important to us. And that means that whenever we do feel connected to people, we feel happy. We're being motivated to do so. It may be through attachment with a parent, it may be through romantic interest, but it also can be just for having that feeling you belong to a community even. That can make you feel good. On the other hand, when you don't feel like you belong to a group, or when you feel you're becoming isolated or even rejected or criticized, those are signals like, hey, there's something going wrong. And the brain wants to punish you for that, to do everything you can to become part of that group again. And that's why the moment we feel rejected, we feel strong emotions. And here's the important part. It's really hard for a human to evolve some completely new aspect of the human body. Like that's why over the past 10,000 of years we don't have evolved wings, for example. Could come in handy, but well, that's just not happening. So in order to develop these mechanisms in a relatively short time period, the human brain did something really smart, because they already work with what we already have. In order to process these responses to rejection, they just hijacked the human pain system. So what's going on is when we are rejected or criticized, the same neural circuits get activated as when you are feeling physical pain. And secretly, we already know that, because the moment we get rejected, we talk in words like, I feel hurt, or I'm feeling heartbreak. Indeed, being rejected can produce physical pain sensations. Now, if you look at it from a neuroscience way, you can see that with both social pain, and that's why we call it social pain, because it is the pain system that's being activated, and physical pain, There are two brain regions that are being activated. You have on the left this part, and that's our ancient brain. That's what lots of humans and also animals have, that are giving us these fight or flight responses. And that's our emotional center in the brain that's, well, giving that first signal like, hey, there's something wrong here, do something. And then there's this second part, and that's the picture on the right. That's on the neocortex, or even better, the prefrontal cortex. That's our new part of the brain that has evolved over the last couple of 10,000 years, that allows us to control these basic emotions. So when we are being rejected, these two systems are intertwined. They're interacting with each other. On one side, you have the strong emotions, and then you have the part of the brain that tries to regulate it. So together, that also explains why some people may feel more or less social pain when they're being rejected. For some people, the emotions are stronger, or perhaps they cannot handle it as well. The frontal cortex cannot cope with it as strongly. For other people, maybe in general, the emotions aren't that strong, but the prefrontal cortex has some issues regulating it. And therefore, they can feel social pain really strongly. Now, we've had the evolutionary perspective, we've had the neuroscience, but how about psychology? How about getting a little bit closer from the biology to practice? Well, there are a lot of perspectives on social pain from a psychological view. So if you're a scientist watching this right now, you might get angry because I'm not detailed or nuanced enough, but I tried to pick the most common theory on this. And it says the moment you get rejected, there are 4 fundamental human needs that are being threatened. And these needs have evolved over time in order to, well, belong to a group and live a fulfilling life. And those needs are the need to belong, the need for self-esteem, the need to control your environment, and the need of meaning or meaningful existence. And that's really interesting because these threats are not always threatened the same way in every circumstance. It depends on the person who's being rejected, but it also depends on the context. Like if you are being rejected in a work environment, maybe that threatens other needs than when you are being rejected online or rejected by a partner. And therefore, the distinct threatened needs also influence the way you experience rejection, but also behave because you're being rejected. For instance, the most important need threat that decides your responses to rejection, that's the control need. Because usually it sounds logical that when you're being rejected, you're going to seek new connections with people. You're going to become more pro-social. Me as an autistic person, I know everything about masking, about trying to be part of that group again, try to have people like me. And that's logical if you look at, well, my self-esteem has been crushed, my belonging has been worse, I don't feel as much meaning anymore. But if people feel like it's mostly their need to control that's being punished or that's being thwarted, they turn antisocial and they start being aggressive instead because they find it most important to regain that control again over your life. And so there are generally two types of responses to rejection. It's either the anxious part of trying to become more social or withdrawing or avoiding, and the angry part, in which we're trying to take back that controlling. Now, this is already really interesting if you're looking for tips or advice on how to help people who experience RSD or experience great social pain, because even though the science isn't that far yet, in general, if your needs are fulfilled, these 4 needs, then rejection, well, it still hurts, but it doesn't really affect you that much. But if you already experienced threatened needs, because you already don't really belong to people, or you already don't feel that much autonomy, or your self-esteem is low already, well, then this smoke detector in your brain is going to raise a lot the moment you get rejected again. So if you want to make rejection hurt people less, make sure these needs are still being fulfilled. And there are a lot of ways to do that. From my own lived experience, I know that even when someone criticizes me, but then gives me some options, for instance, to regain connectedness, then it puts me in control again, and it puts me in perspective to belong to people again. And if perhaps, well, you are at work and you have to sack someone, that's a rejection, but you can still say, hey, there's 3 options maybe you can do now. You put that person back into control, and then maybe able to handle that rejection a little bit better. Oh, more to how to cope with rejection later. But let's get to the main topic of today, which is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's a pretty popular term right now on social media, but the interesting part is that it's quite an ancient term, really. It's already been proposed by psychologists as a condition in the 60s. And back then, and I'm so sorry to have to say this, I don't consider myself terrible or brutal to women, but then it was proposed as a condition for women who couldn't handle breakups. So they basically felt, yeah, well, women were too emotional, and well, it's a condition, it's an illness, and we should call it RSD. Well, gladly that didn't make the DSM, the book of psychological conditions, but it was recycled in a completely different context. And the person responsible for this is William Dodson. William Dodson is an American psychiatrist. He's retired now, but still involved in the RSD community. And he specialized in ADHD in adults. And he was looking for some more information, so he started being a little bit of a detective and was looking into the archives of Dr. Paul Wender, a pioneer on ADHD. And Dr. Paul Wender said that people with ADHD are really sensitive to rejection and criticism. But William Dodson didn't really know about that. He didn't really recognize it in his clients. So what did he do? He started asking them. He set up a little bit of a poll. And he was shocked to know that pretty much every one of his clients said, yes, rejection and criticism is so hard for me to cope with. It causes a complete emotional dysregulation. And maybe you cannot always see it, but it hurts me so much. So much that 1/3 of his clients said, well, it's the most debilitating parts of living with ADHD. And this great prevalence that is almost prevalent in every person with ADHD made Dodson say that RSD is a symptom of ADHD. So we were pretty much born with it. He said it was due to differences in brain structure, and this prefrontal cortex I talked about is a little bit less developed. And he said, well, maybe it should be part of the criteria of ADHD even. So he started publishing on it, and he started writing on it in special websites, in podcasts, for instance, one of them in which he said, well, RSD is the deepest, darkest secret of people with ADHD. So, well, there are a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists who are publishing new terms or new constructs, or think they refound the wheel even in psychology. But for some reason, RSD became a hit on social media. Lots of neurodivergent people, not just people with ADHD, but also autistic people, for example, said, yes, finally, there's some recognition. There's a term for what I experience. For instance, this comment by Sarah saying that, well, it's almost like getting that autism diagnosis again, in which it explains so much of my life. And it puts me in control. Getting back to the need to control again. to learn how to cope with these situations better. And not just people responding on William Dodson's articles, but it also went viral on, for instance, even TikTok. And to show you the way it's being talked about, and also so you don't have to listen to my voice for 30 minutes, I selected 2 videos in which people talk about how they experience RSD. I'm going to show them, but I do need to reload the PowerPoint a little because there was a small issue. And then once I've showed them, I'll say something about it.
I'm autistic and I'm so scared of rejection that I will avoid something at all.
Just seem to have phrase in the video.
Out of the fear of being rejected. I'll ghost friends if I think they don't like me. I'll quit my job if I think my boss doesn't like me. And I'll call in sick if I think there's an activity that I'm not good at. And I'll do all of this just because I'm so scared that someone will come up to me and be like, I don't like you, or I don't think you're good at this. And all of this is called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and it can be seen a lot in autistic people, but other people can experience it too. It's when someone has an intense fear of being rejected. If you struggle with this, you might avoid things out of fear of rejection, but you might also constantly be second-guessing yourself. And I think a lot of mine stems from trauma and being teased as a little kid. I was constantly told that everything I did, said, or thought was wrong. So now I second-guess myself to the point where I am gaslighting myself into believing that something that I'm doing is wrong, and that someone else will see that and they will all of a sudden reject me. This also leaves me being unable to set boundaries with other people. I'm so scared of being rejected that all of a sudden I become a people pleaser, and everything about me gets pushed aside, and I want to make others happy. I end up setting no boundaries, and then people walk all over me. And I'm miserable because I didn't set any boundaries, but at the same time, I'm so happy that at least I'm not getting rejected that I don't know what to do. I'm autistic.
Being invalidated by someone you care about hurts. It hits you in the chest like a ton of bricks, but it's local to that interaction. If you get invalidated by everyone you care about for a long enough time, you start to believe them. You start to internalize the invalidation, and you change yourself until they validate you. By this point, you've already had to change so much about yourself to avoid rejection that you start trying to predict it. You start seeing it where it isn't. You start seeing it in the expressions on people's faces. You start hearing it in their tones of voice. You start feeling it in the absence of a text message. This is how rejection sensitivity dysphoria is born. It controls the life of so many neurodivergent people. Oftentimes the inevitability of rejection is the only consistent thing in a neurodivergent brain. Honestly, I have no remedies or answers in this video. I struggle with this every day, and despite so much effort and so many hours of therapy, it still dictates a lot of the way that I think. This is just an awareness post because neurodivergence is so fucking hard, and there's so many parts to it that people don't see from the outside. I love you guys. Have a good one.
All right. Well, as you can see, RSD is something that can affect you a lot and explain a lot of things that's going on in your life. There are 2 things I would like to discuss a little bit or talk about when I'm seeing this, because first of all, it becomes clear that some people are talking about RSD in a different way than William Dodson initially wanted to, perhaps. For instance, William Dodson is mostly talking about what happens when you perceive rejection and you feel responses. For the first one, I believe she's called Morgan Foley, is basically saying, well, RSD is fearing rejection. And that's something I'm seeing a lot on social media and even on websites, which are giving a list of symptoms of RSD. Everyone seems to have their own definition of it. And that's something I, in some ways, encourage, because, well, if you're neurodivergent and have lived experience, it's fine that you're sharing your own feelings and experiences. But it's also interesting for me to follow how well, there isn't really a consensus on what it is yet, and that's something for research in the future to find out. And a second important thing that happened in both videos is that both people said, well, this may be a trauma response. I've been rejected so often in my life. The social pain system in my brain, which we've talked about, may be turning into a little bit of an overdrive. And that's quite logical, and there's lots of science backing it up that rejection sensitivity is mainly shaped by life experiences. However, William Dodson says, well, it's a symptom of ADHD, so it's innate and it's inherent. And that's also something that isn't clear yet. But there could be some signs that indeed it is inherent. I've already talked about the brain structure issue in ADHD, which could be a cause. But for instance, autistic people are generally, on average, more sensitive to pain. And if you're more sensitive to pain, the sensory sensitivity thing, and you know it's being processed in the same brain region as social pain and rejection, it's quite obvious that maybe you're more sensitive to rejection as well. So it's probably a bit of both, a bit of nature and nurture, but it will be interesting, at least for me, to see how this trend of what RSD really is continuing like. Okay, a little bit more about the science and a little bit nuance. And it's always annoying when scientists aren't as enthusiastic sometimes, but I do have to say that right now. First of all, there isn't really research on RSD itself. We don't even know what it is, how to conceptualize it. And even among researchers, for instance, there are 3 PhD students researching RSD and autism right now. We all have these different thoughts about what it even is. Like, I'm more focused on the responses to rejection. And there's another PhD student who says, well, it's mostly about perceiving rejection. Maybe RSD is like you see rejection everywhere you go. And also, how should we measure RSD? Well, what I did for my studies is to do a so-called scoping review, in which I'm just reviewing what's already known in literature. And I'm seeing that the responses to rejection in autistic people are measured in so many different ways, from neuroactivation to blood pressure following rejection in experiments, from heart rate variability, and just asking people like, hey, from 1 to 10, how much did this response hurt you? And what I do have to note is that in autistic people, and to my knowledge also in people with ADHD, quite interestingly, on average, they don't seem to be that much more sensitive to rejection at all. I think that in autism there are about 9 studies right now, and some are saying that autistic people are slightly more sensitive to rejection, and some studies say they are a bit less sensitive to rejection. So on average, that doesn't really seem to be something like RSD in every neurodivergent person. So we do need some more science to find out what's going on, if it's maybe some specific group of neurodivergent people, for instance, people who have been bullied a lot in their youth. But in general, at least I can say that, of course, if neurodivergent people are being rejected so often in life, it's obvious that these responses to rejection are becoming a great part of your life. So I don't want to invalidate your feelings. I do want to say that in general, science hasn't really found an answer yet why so many people do experience RSD. Regardless, there's one really important thing that the term RSD has brought, and that's attention and awareness to responses to rejection. And it may even be most important in autistic people, because sadly there are so many people thinking that autistic people are not affected by rejection at all. For instance, Naomi Eisenberger, which is the person who came up with the term social pain and has done a lot of research on social pain, a couple of years ago even wrote that autistic people weren't able to perceive rejection at all. So why would they be bothered by rejection? And I do believe these harmful stigmas are very important to be addressed in future research and in discourse, and RSD is really doing that. And there's also this school of researchers who do admit that autistic people may be more sensitive to rejection, but then they're doing some victim blaming because they're, for instance, saying that we're being rejected more often because our social skills are poor. They're not really focusing on maybe that people are a little bit too intolerant to us. And that's what you're also seeing in interventions right now, how to handle RSD. It's always about changing the person, and it's not about changing the environment. And it's not about inclusion and tolerance of neurodiversity, sadly. I've talked about RSD a lot, and I've also shared some lived experience. But when I started my research, the most important part for me was to gather some more lived experience, and especially on what RSD then entailed to those people and what it meant to them. So the first thing I did for my PhD was to interview 19 autistic adults, some also with co-occurring ADHD, on their RSD. And I won't repeat every part of the results because it's a bit of a repetition of what I said already. But I do want to share some interesting findings that I haven't discussed just yet. And that's first of all that lots of them talked about experiencing vicarious rejection sensitivity. They didn't use that wording, but that's what's common in research, in which they said that even perceiving other people being criticized or being rejected, whether that's in real life or seeing someone get bullied in the workplace or just watching on TV in a sitcom where you know it's acting, it could still make them feel the same social pain sensations. So they also try to avoid even just seeing rejection or even avoiding words on social media or in books that could make them bring up these experiences again. Second, and that's also very relevant if you're talking about how can you assist people who experience RSD in the workplace. Lots of people said, well, RSD is one thing, but I'm being rejected over my RSD. The moment I talk about how sensitive I am to rejection, or I cannot handle it, I am being rejected. I am being laughed at in my face, even, some people said. Other people started seeing like, hey, well, if rejection hurts that person, let's hurt that person. And they're being bullied even more. And there's also a scientific term for that, which we call social pain minimization. And that may be the true reason why rejection can affect people so much. The stigma is still on RSD and responses to rejection, even though we've just seen in the start of my presentation that feeling hurt is a normal adaptive feeling. But yeah, there's still this stigma on it. And third, I also asked them, like, what helped you against your RSD, or at least to cope with it better? And there were a few different perspectives on it. First of all, people said, well, if people were nicer to me, I wouldn't experience as much RSD anymore. Or if people at least validated my experiences, that's already an important step. And especially when it comes to, if you're a therapist, for example, people said, well, the exact therapy isn't even that important. It's mostly about someone who accepts me the way I am and works neurodiversity affirmative. However, there were some specific interventions which were mentioned a lot. First of all, medication. Now, I don't want to put everyone on medication or even propose that. But interestingly, even the slightest over-the-counter painkiller can dampen these responses to rejection. And that's logical because, once again, I said that social pain is being processed in the same brain part of physical pain. In fact, Tylenol, I don't know how it's called in Scotland, but we usually call it Tylenol here. It's paracetamol also. It was used to prove that these brain regions were the same. Because if you are is affected by rejection due to the simple painkiller, well, then maybe there is this shared neural wiring going on. Second, there was a lot of enthusiasm about what we now call third wave cognitive behavioral therapies, which is not about changing your minds or changing your behavior even that much, but mostly about learning to accept that it's there. So when you're being rejected, you don't fight against it, or you don't think differently, or you don't try to become a cool person who tries to seek rejection a million times and get toughened to it. But no, just let it happen more so. So you can think about mindfulness, or perhaps acceptance and commitment therapy, or self-compassion therapy to just be a bit milder to yourself and handle rejection a little bit better. All right, I've been talking for so long right now. I think I should end my presentation. If there are any personal questions you wish to ask right now, you can always contact me on LinkedIn or via my email address.